Dust swirled across Willow Valley, the sun bleeding red over Willow Creek Ranch. Clara Weston knelt beside her truck, its engine hissing like a wounded beast, steam curling into the dusk. Her wrench slipped, frustration etching her face. She was 10 miles from home, phone dead, coyotes stirring in the distance. The ranch's debts loomed, a foreclosure notice tucked in her glove box. A shadow fell across the gravel, hooves crunching softly. She looked up, heart skipping. A man sat astride a black horse, hat low, denim shirt blending with the fading light. Lost or broken down? His voice was steady, unhurried, carrying a weight she couldn't place. Clara gripped her wrench tighter. Who's asking? He tilted his head, eyes hidden. Daniel. Just Daniel. Something in his calm unnerved her, as if the valley itself knew more about him than she did. After 20 minutes, he wiped his hands on his jeans and looked up at her. She'll need a tow. Radiator's busted. I figured, she sighed. There's a ranch about 10 miles west, mine. Got a trailer and another truck there. If you can help me hitch it, I'll feed you dinner. Daniel tipped his hat slightly. Deal. It took another hour to hitch the truck to his horse and get her gear loaded into his saddlebag. She followed him on foot for a while until he insisted she ride. She climbed up behind him, awkward but grateful, trying not to lean too close, but the night air was cooling fast. When they reached the edge of her land, the old wooden sign greeted them, Willow Creek Ranch, 1979. The lights from the porch glowed soft and warm against the dusk. Horses in the pasture lifted their heads but didn't stir. Daniel led them to the barn and helped unhitch everything in silence. You any good with tools? Clara asked as they unloaded the supplies. Depends on the job. I've got a busted gate and a leaky roof if you're looking for work. He glanced at her. Just a few days, then I'll move on. She nodded. Just a few days. Later that night, Clara set a plate of stew and cornbread on the table inside the small kitchen. Daniel sat across from her, freshly showered but still in those weather-worn clothes. He ate like someone who was grateful, not starving, and never once asked for more than she offered. She watched him from over her glass. You ever settle anywhere? He shook his head. Not in a long time. Running from something? Running toward peace, he said simply. That answer caught her off guard. The wind outside picked up, brushing the window panes with soft fingers. The night settled around them in a hush. They spoke little after that. She offered him the spare room in the old bunkhouse beside the barn. He accepted, thanked her, and stepped out into the moonlight. Clara locked the door behind him, her brow furrowed. There was something about him, calm but distant, kind but closed off. A drifter cowboy, she thought, one of the old kind. She shook her head, poured herself another glass of water, and turned off the lights. But sometime just before dawn, a crash shattered the quiet. Clara bolted upright, heart pounding. Outside, the horses were screaming. She grabbed the rifle by the door, threw on her boots, and ran toward the barn. She'd barely made it halfway before she saw them. 3 figures in the shadows, moving fast, one already inside the barn. One of the doors hung off its hinges. Then came the sound of fists, grunting, a body hitting the wall. She raised the rifle, trembling, but then saw movement at the side, Daniel. He moved like lightning, grabbing one of the intruders by the collar and slamming him against the post. The man dropped. Another charged him, but Daniel sidestepped, drove a punch into his ribs, then swept his legs from under him in a move that was too fluid to be cowboy, too clean to be drunk luck. The third man took one look at Daniel and ran. By the time Clara reached the scene, Daniel was checking the locks on the stalls, calming the horses. You okay? She gasped. Better question for them, he replied, nodding toward the 2 groaning men on the ground. She stared at him, stunned. Who are you? He met her gaze. Just Daniel. But Clara wasn't sure she believed that anymore. Daniel worked with his sleeves rolled and his words few. By mid-morning the next day, he had already repaired the broken barn door, reinforced 2 stalls, and fixed the loose hinges on the feed shed. Clara watched him from a distance, chewing on the end of a pencil as she sat on the porch steps with her paperwork forgotten in her lap. She had seen grown men buckle under the weight of a stubborn horse or curse their way through a simple gate repair, but Daniel moved with a quiet rhythm, like he had nothing to prove. His hands were steady, precise, calloused but not careless. He didn't rush, he didn't brag, he just fixed. And that unsettled her more than the break in the night before. Clara waited until the last nail was hammered in before approaching. He wiped his brow, turned toward her like he already knew she was there. "Thanks," she said, "for last night." He nodded. "You get much trouble out here?" "Sometimes. Land like this tends to draw interest, especially from people who want to take what they didn't earn." Daniel didn't reply, just walked toward the trough and splashed water on his face. "You ever learn how to throw someone like that in a bar fight?" she asked, folding her arms. Daniel looked up, water dripping from his jawline. "Not exactly. You move like someone trained." He said nothing. She stepped closer. "You know, it's real hard to trust someone who won't tell you a damn thing about themselves." He dried his face with a rag and looked at her evenly. "You trust me enough to let me stay. That was before you started breaking ribs in the dark like some ex-special ops." He almost smiled, almost. "I told you, just Daniel. And I told you that doesn't fly here. You're either running from something, hiding something, or both. So which is it?" Daniel looked out over the pasture, the horses grazing quietly, the wind tugging at the tall grass. He didn't answer right away. "Sometimes people lose things," he said softly, "and they don't want to talk about them." Clara's jaw tensed, but something in his voice, some crack just barely there, gave her pause. She nodded once. "Well, you earned a few more nights. That's all I'm saying." He gave a small nod. "That's all I need." Over the next few days, Daniel fell into a rhythm on the ranch. He was up before sunrise, helped with feed, patched a section of the fence that had been sagging for months, and even managed to calm Clara's most difficult mare, Star, with nothing but a low whistle and steady hands. Clara, for her part, kept trying to puzzle him out. She asked questions in passing: where he grew up, what brought him west, if he'd ever trained horses professionally. But every answer was vague, carefully worded, as if he was building a wall even as he walked beside her. One night, after a long day of work, they sat on the porch, watching the sky turn from amber to deep blue. Clara broke the silence first. "My dad used to say, land was only as good as the man willing to stay and work it." Daniel nodded, his gaze on the horizon. "You believe that?" she asked. "I believe land remembers the hands that build it and the feet that run from it." She tilted her head. "And which are you?" He looked at her then. Really looked, eyes shadowed but honest. "I used to build. Then I ran. Still figuring out which one wins in the end." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Clara asked, "You good with horses because you love them or because they listen better than people?" Daniel chuckled softly. "Little of both." Clara smiled. "You ever think about staying in one place?" His eyes didn't leave the land. "Sometimes. You think about staying here?" He turned to her, slower this time. "Would it matter if I did?" She blinked, her chest tightened. "I don't let people in easy," she said quietly. "Me neither." Their eyes met, something unspoken passed between them. Acknowledgement, maybe even understanding. No declarations, no promises, just two people who had learned to survive the hard way, wondering if maybe this time was different. Then, in the distance, the sound of a truck rumbled over the gravel road. Clara stood, tension snapping back into her shoulders. "That's Victor." Daniel watched her face change. "Problem?" She nodded grimly. "Big one." And just like that, the calm they'd built was about to be tested. The truck pulled up in a cloud of dust, its engine growling low like a warning. Clara stood frozen on the porch, arms crossed tightly across her chest, jaw locked in a way Daniel hadn't yet seen. Victor Kane stepped out of the driver's seat like he owned the land beneath him, same as always. He was tall, tanned, and wore a tailored button-down that didn't belong anywhere near dirt. His smile was wide, practiced, polished. Daniel didn't like him instantly. "Clara," Victor said, walking toward the porch like he'd been invited. "Long time no see. Heard your truck broke down, thought I'd swing by, lend a hand." Clara's voice was flat. Too late. Someone already helped. Victor's eyes flicked to Daniel, who leaned against the porch post with casual indifference but sharp eyes. Daniel didn't move, didn't blink. He didn't need to. Victor's smile twitched. Friend of yours? Daniel didn't respond. Clara stepped in. He's helping around the ranch. That's all you need to know. Victor chuckled, turning back to her. That's so. I figured, after what happened, you'd be ready to talk business. The offer still stands. It never stood, Victor, Clara snapped. You just keep pretending it did. He tilted his head, mock hurt. Come on now, you know you can't keep this place afloat forever. You're a heartbeat away from foreclosure, and I've got the means to fix that. I'm not selling. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. You sure about that? Because next time, I might not come asking. Daniel straightened. You threatening her? Victor turned. Excuse me? Daniel walked slowly down the steps, calm, controlled. You came uninvited. You're pushing. I'd call that a threat. Victor took a half step back, caught himself. You don't know who you're talking to. Daniel's smile didn't reach his eyes. No, but I know the type. Victor narrowed his eyes. This ain't your business, cowboy. Daniel's voice dropped. It is now. Clara stepped between them. That's enough, both of you. Victor took another breath, trying to recover his arrogance. You'll regret this, Clara. You always do. He turned, walked back to his truck, and peeled off down the gravel road, flinging dirt behind him. Daniel watched until the dust settled. You okay? He asked quietly. Clara nodded, but her fists were still clenched. He's not going to stop. Daniel looked out across the land, his jaw tense. Then neither will I. That night, Clara barely slept. She checked the locks twice, walked the fence line by flashlight, and jumped at every sound the wind carried. Daniel sat in the barn, sharpening a blade with slow, steady strokes, eyes fixed on the door. It wasn't until just past midnight that it happened. A metallic bang. The horses panicked. Clara was already running as Daniel burst from the side stall, moving with frightening precision. Two men in black hoodies were halfway through unchaining the stall doors when he tackled the first one, driving him into the ground. The second man pulled a crowbar and swung. Daniel ducked, counted, grabbed the man's wrist, and twisted until the weapon dropped. One punch, two. The man was out cold. Clara arrived with the rifle, panting. You good? She asked. Daniel nodded, breathing hard but steady. They weren't pros, just hired hands. Victor, she spat. Daniel knelt beside one of the men, checked his pockets, pulled out a folded note. No name, just a crudely drawn map of her property and the stall marked with a red X. Clara felt her blood run cold. They were going to take the mare, she whispered, sell her, damage the ranch's reputation. Daniel stood, eyes narrowing. He's not just trying to scare you. He's trying to dismantle you piece by piece. Clara felt something shift inside her. I can't do this alone, she said. You're not, Daniel replied. The next morning, Clara found him tightening the perimeter fence with fresh barbed wire. She brought him coffee, silent for a moment before saying, You didn't even hesitate last night. Daniel looked at her, hands still dirty. Didn't need to. You've done this before. His silence was answer enough. Why do you hide it? She asked. Because the last time I fought for something, he said slowly, I lost more than I gained. She swallowed. And this time? He looked at her, eyes softer. Still figuring that out. She placed the mug on the fence post beside him. Well, for what it's worth, I'm glad you're here. He nodded. So am I. But in the back of her mind, Clara knew Victor wasn't finished, and Daniel was starting to look less like a cowboy and more like someone trained to survive much worse. It started with a box, an old, dusty one shoved into the back of the loft behind a tangle of ropes and broken tack. Clara hadn't meant to find it. She was searching for extra blankets and nearly tripped over it. The box was heavy, metal corners, a rusted latch. When she flipped it open, a cloud of old barn dust filled her lungs. Inside were papers, dozens of them, neatly folded documents, yellowed at the edges, tied with a leather strap, and on top, an envelope with the name D.W. Carter written in elegant, precise script. She froze. D.W. Carter. It wasn't a name she heard often, but she remembered it. Everyone did. Years ago, it had been all over the news. Daniel W. Carter, the silent partner behind the largest land and oil acquisitions in the region, the man who had quietly amassed an empire by the age of 35 and then disappeared, vanished, they said, after his fiancée died in a private plane crash en route to a charity gala. Rumors flew: grief, scandal, guilt, betrayal. Some claimed he lost everything in a silent buyout, others whispered he had staged his own death. Clara stared at the envelope, then pulled the documents free. Titles, deeds, trust papers, and legal letters, most bearing his signature, Daniel's, but not just Daniel. Her heart raced. She climbed down the ladder, hands shaking, and went straight to the house. She needed confirmation. She powered up her old laptop, Googled the name, and there he was, a younger version, clean-shaven, sharper around the edges, dressed in suits worth more than her truck, but the eyes were the same. It was him, Daniel W. Carter, the man who had owned half the state, the man sleeping in her bunkhouse, the man who hadn't loved in years. She found him in the pasture later that evening, checking the fence line with one of the younger colts trailing behind him like a shadow. He looked up as she approached, reading her face before she said a word. "You found it," he said quietly. Clara didn't answer. She just stood there, papers in hand, betrayal in her voice. "You lied to me." Daniel exhaled slowly. "I didn't lie. I just didn't tell you. You let me believe you were some wandering cowboy, some drifter with a quiet past and a few regrets. You let me trust you. I never asked you to," he said, not unkindly. "But you knew I did." He nodded. "Yes." Clara paced, her voice shaking. "You're Daniel Carter. You're the guy who disappeared after his empire crumbled." "It didn't crumble," he replied. "I walked away from it." She turned to him, eyes sharp. "Why?" He paused. "Because I built something I thought would change the world, and when the world broke it, I didn't have anything left but silence." She didn't speak. The wind blew softly around them, stirring the dry grass. Daniel stepped closer. "I never meant to deceive you. I just wanted to be someone else for a little while, somewhere people didn't see money or legacy or failure. They saw a man with a hammer and a horse. And you let them," she said, voice bitter. "I let you." Clara looked down, the papers trembling in her hands. "You said you were running toward peace, but you're still running, Daniel, even here." "I know," he said, "and I'm sorry." She looked up, tears burning. "I don't care who you were, but I cared who I thought you were." "I'm still him," he whispered. She shook her head. "I don't know who you are anymore." And with that, she turned and walked away, leaving him standing in the fading light, nothing in his hands but regret. Behind him, the colt let out a soft whinny. Daniel didn't move, because for the first time in years, he realized what it meant to be seen and what it cost to hide. Clara left before sunrise. She did not leave a note. She did not look back. The box of documents sat untouched on the kitchen table, a silent monument to everything she thought she knew and all she now questioned. She packed only a duffel bag and drove her spare truck into town, needing space, needing air, needing something that was not Daniel Carter. She hated that name, because it meant everything she felt, every flicker of trust, of connection, was built on a half-truth. The man who mended her fences and rode her skittish mares in silence wasn't just Daniel. He was a millionaire in hiding, a man with more power than he led on, a man who had been watching the world from behind shadows and letting her believe he had none. At the edge of town, she booked a room at a small roadside inn and tried not to think, but the silence was heavier there than it had been in the pasture. Later that day, she walked past the hardware store on Main Street and paused when she heard her name whispered behind her. "Clara, you seen the news?" She turned to find an older rancher she vaguely recognized. Thompson, maybe. He held up a crumpled local newspaper. "Two more families pressured to sell. Victor Kane expands development footprint." She snatched it from his hand. The headline was bad. The article, worse. Victor Kane, her ex, was buying land fast, too fast. Every family who had received one of his invitations had either left town quietly or fallen into legal battles they couldn't afford. He wasn't just threatening now, he was executing. The last line made her stomach twist. Executing with no resistance. Kane Development expects to break ground within 3 months on the southern edge of Willow Valley. Her land, her home. The puzzle pieces snapped together. The pressure, the threats, the break-in, the targeted attacks. Victor wasn't just coming for her. He was sweeping the valley, choking the life out of it one deed at a time. And she had walked away from the only man who could stop him. That night, the wind whipped hard outside her motel window. Clara sat at the small desk, staring at the folded newspaper beside her untouched dinner. Every memory of Daniel swirled in her head, his quiet strength, the way he always rose at dawn, the scars on his knuckles, the sorrow behind his eyes. He hadn't lied to hurt her, he had hidden to protect what little of himself was left. And she had run, not because he wasn't who he said he was, but because, deep down, he had become someone she might love, and that terrified her. But now, love wasn't the point. Victor was winning, and Clara needed someone who didn't just care but could fight. At dawn, she drove back. The ranch was quiet, the front gate stood open, the air smelled of dust and horses and something deeper, something like returning. She found him in the barn. Daniel was brushing down one of the colts, sleeves rolled, his movements steady, as if nothing had broken between them. She didn't speak at first, just stood there watching. He turned, and when their eyes met, there was no anger, no demand, only waiting. "I read the news," she said. He nodded. "He's moving faster than we thought." "I know." She stepped closer. "I walked away. I know that too." There was a long pause, her throat tightened. "I didn't come back for an apology or an explanation." Daniel looked at her carefully. "Then why did you?" "Because I need you," she said, not just the man with a wrench and a soft voice. "I need Daniel Carter, the man who built half the state, the man who can stop Victor before he burns it all to the ground." His eyes softened. "Are you sure?" "I'm not sure of anything," she said, "except that you never stopped fighting, even when no one saw it." He stepped forward. "And I never stopped wanting to protect this place, or you." Clara blinked back tears. "So what do we do now?" she asked. Daniel picked up a folder from the bench, a legal file marked in bold, Kane Holdings LLC. "We make a plan," he said, "and then we make it loud." Together, they walked out into the morning light. Victor had power, but they had purpose, and maybe, just maybe, that was enough to win. 3 days later, the old meeting hall in town was packed. Daniel stood at the front, sleeves rolled, tie absent, his voice low but clear. A large easel behind him displayed maps, deeds, and a trail of connections, names of shell companies, real estate transfers, and financial footprints that led inevitably to one man, Victor Kane. Clara stood beside him, scanning the crowd. Farmers, teachers, ranchers, some angry, some scared, all tired of being quiet. "I know I haven't given you reason to trust me," Daniel said, "but you all know Victor's offer isn't business. It's pressure. You've seen it, felt it. I've seen what happens when men like him go unchecked, and I'm done watching." He held up a packet of documents. "These are legal filings for an injunction. I'll cover the costs. You just need to stand with us." The room was still. Then an older woman raised her hand. "You really Carter?" Daniel nodded. "Yes, Mom." "Then why help us now?" He paused. "Because I didn't before, and I should have." A murmur ran through the room. One by one, people nodded, then stood. By the end of the hour, 25 signatures sat on the paperwork, enough to stall Victor's project. But they all knew he wouldn't take that lying down. That night, Daniel paced the barn, phone pressed to his ear. "Yeah, we filed. Injunction hits first thing in the morning," he said, "which means Victor's out of options unless he uses force." He hung up. Clara stood in the doorway. "You think he'll show?" Daniel nodded. "He has to." At midnight, the sound of engines cut through the silence. Clara's stomach dropped. "They're here." Daniel handed her a flashlight and a walkie-talkie. "Go out the back, call Sheriff Holt, tell him what's happening." "I'm not leaving you." "I'm not asking," he said, but she didn't move. Daniel exhaled. "Then stay close." They slipped out into the shadows. Headlights flared on the other side of the pasture, at least 3 trucks. Figures jumped out, flashlights sweeping the land. Victor's voice rang out, cold and cocky. "Daniel, come on out. We both know this land doesn't mean a damn thing without blood on it." Daniel stepped into view, shotgun lowered but ready. You made your move. Now back off. Victor snarled. You think paperwork's going to stop me? No, Daniel said, but witnesses will. Sirens echoed in the distance. Victor cursed. You called the cops. Daniel's grip tightened. No, Clara did. Victor turned just as she stepped out behind him, rifle aimed. Back away, Victor. He lunged. A gunshot cracked through the night. Victor dropped to one knee, clutching his side. His men scattered into the dark. Clara ran to Daniel, heart racing. You okay? He nodded, though a gash bled from his temple. Close enough. The sheriff's cruisers tore down the road seconds later, blue and red lights slicing through the dust. Victor was arrested on the spot, unregistered weapons, attempted assault, trespassing. The deputies didn't need convincing. By the time the sun rose over Willow Valley, the legal fight had just begun, but the worst of the war was over, and they had won the first battle together. Daniel was slower on his feet for the next week. The gash above his temple was stitched, the bruised ribs bandaged, but Clara could tell pain had a way of settling into more than just muscle. She noticed it in the way he stood a little too long at the fence line, watching the wind tug at the grass, in the quiet sighs he let slip when he thought she wasn't looking. But he never complained, and she never left his side. They worked in rhythm again, like nothing had broken between them. Feeding the horses, walking the pasture, tending to the small garden behind the barn. But there was something gentler now in their silence, something understood. One evening, as the sun slipped behind the hills and painted the sky in warm streaks of peach and rose, Clara found him sitting by the corral, brushing Star with slow, steady strokes. You're going to spoil her, she said with a soft smile. She deserves it, Daniel replied, running his hand down the mare's neck. We all do, once in a while. Clara joined him on the bench, folding her hands in her lap. You ever think about what comes next? She asked. Daniel didn't answer right away. Every day. He looked over at her, eyes steady. I used to think I was built for building things. Deals, projects, empires. But lately, he trailed off, gaze drifting toward the hills. I just want to build something that lasts. Something quiet. Something true. Clara swallowed hard. You have. Daniel reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, worn box. Not velvet, not new, just simple, like everything about him. He opened it to reveal a silver ring, delicate, hand-worked, with a single faint engraving on the inside. She recognized the script immediately. It was her mother's handwriting. Somehow, he'd taken a line from an old birthday card she'd once left on the kitchen table and had it etched. Come home when you're ready. Clara's breath caught. Daniel didn't kneel, he didn't make a speech, he just looked at her, eyes full of a quiet, raw honesty. I haven't loved in years, he said softly, and I didn't think I ever would again. Not like this, not where it mattered. Clara blinked back tears. I don't need a church, he added. I don't need a crowd. I just need you. And the sound of your boots on the porch every morning. She laughed through the tears, then nodded, her voice trembling. Yes. Daniel slipped the ring on her finger. It fit like it had always been waiting for her. They sat there a while longer as the night crept in, the stars blinking into view one by one. No fanfare, no flash, just two people quietly, completely choosing each other. 1 year later, the hills of Willow Valley were greener than they had been in decades. A slow spring rain had rolled through, coaxing wildflowers out of the hard-packed dirt. Horses roamed the pasture, their manes fluttering in the breeze. Laughter rang from the barn, children's voices, light and full of life. The ranch was no longer just a home, it was a refuge. Clara stood on the porch, a sleeping infant tucked against her chest in a woven wrap. Her daughter, Leela, had her father's steady brow and her mother's quiet stubbornness. The baby stirred slightly as Clara watched a group of teenagers saddle horses under the guidance of 2 volunteers. Across the field, Daniel walked beside a boy of about 10, holding the reins of a patient mare. He moved more slowly now, not from age but from purpose, like every step mattered. The boy laughed at something Daniel said, and Daniel ruffled his hair. This was what they had built after the storm of Victor's downfall and the court battles that followed. The community had come together. People Clara never imagined would stand in the same room now worked side by side. The ranch became a non-profit center, offering equine therapy for veterans, at-risk youth, and families who had lost too much. Daniel never put his name on anything. He didn't want attention, he just wanted to give back. Clara walked down the porch steps, careful with Leela's head tucked beneath her hand. Daniel saw her from across the corral and smiled, that quiet, easy smile that still undid her every time. "Morning, Mrs. Carter," he called. "You're late for breakfast, Mr. Carter." He met her halfway, kissing her forehead gently before peeking at the sleeping baby. "She's out cold, like her father after fence duty." Daniel chuckled. "Fair." They walked together, the golden light warming the earth around them. A sign creaked softly near the entrance of the ranch, freshly sanded and lovingly repainted. It was mounted to the original post her father had put up decades ago, the new name carved deep in the wood: Carter's Rise, where we come back to life. Daniel looked at it and let out a slow breath. "Think your dad would have liked it?" Clara nodded. "He would have liked you." Daniel's eyes softened. "Took me long enough to earn that." She reached for his hand. "You earned it the moment you stayed." They stood there a while, watching the wind roll through the hills, their daughter pressed warm between them, the ranch alive with sound and spirit. They had lost much, but they had built more, not with steel or oil or power, but with love, with truth, with the quiet decision to keep choosing each other day after day, no matter how the world turned. As the sun rose over Carter's Rise, Clara looked up at Daniel and smiled. "Let's ride," she whispered. He nodded, and together, with Leela tucked safe against her mother's chest, they saddled 2 horses and rode slowly up the ridge trail toward the same hilltop where Daniel had once watched the land alone, thinking he would never belong again. But now, at the top, he looked down, not as a drifter or a ghost of who he'd been, but as a husband, a father, a man who had come back to life exactly where he was meant to be. Sometimes, the most powerful love stories are not born from grand gestures or perfect beginnings, but from broken pieces rebuilt slowly with steady hands and quiet hearts. Daniel and Clara didn't just find each other. They found healing, purpose, and the kind of home that cannot be bought, only built. Because love, real love, is not about who you were. It's about who you choose to become together. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that even the loneliest heart can find its way back to love, then please consider subscribing to Soul Stirring Stories. At Soul Stirring Stories, we bring you heartfelt, emotional tales that remind us all of one simple truth: it's never too late to begin again. Tap subscribe, turn on the notification bell, and join our growing community of story lovers who believe in second chances and soul-deep love. Thank you for watching, and remember, wherever you are, someone is waiting to ride home with you. Soul Stirring Stories.